listeners, and welcome to High Tea Mystique with your hosts, Kat.
And I'm Tess and Pam.
In a world changing faster than the time it takes to brew a cup of tea,
High Tea Mystique reminds you that no experience is too big or too small to teach us something about ourselves. So join us for a cup of tea as we steep into adulting, womanhood, independence, and more. So I feel like this was probably the longest topic that I've thought about in the making. Because, and just to show the amount of time that has passed, Nerys was not pregnant
when this
was first talked about. And I can't remember what exactly was happening, but Nerys and I have been friends for a while, and we work together, and we were talking about something in our back table area, and I feel like that's where it came out. That's where it was born. And we were saying something about gossip. And I don't know how it came to fruition. Like, my memory is like...
I don't remember, but I remember being very frustrated and just talking about the bad reputation that gossip has and how I feel like it's like a gendered, bad reputation.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, that should be a podcast episode.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay.
I just remember the silence when she said that. And I looked at her and I was like, we're going to invite you to the episode.
And she's like, oh.
No, okay. Nerys didn't know. It was like a silent, I was like, oh, wait, no, I did know because I told you it should be a podcast idea.
Yeah.
And
I've been nervous ever since.
It's okay. No need to be nervous here.
No need to be nervous here. And here I'm going to address everyone who's not in the room, but also welcoming everybody. We've had a good long welcome with each other, so I'm so happy that we're in the space together. And here's to everybody who's not in our space. Welcome, High Tea Mystique. Another episode. Hello. Number two. Maybe. I don't know.
Number two of number two.
Number two, season 2. We had a very hip-hop theme to when we introduced season 2. We were like, don't call it a comeback.
We're here. We're in it.
And I've said it again, so it just never ends. And we're joined today with, someone I already introduced, but I'll introduce more warmly. My friend, my good friend, Nerys. We have known each other for, oh my God. So we are about to reach 10 years. Because we met each other in 2017.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Time
That's
flies.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We met each other in 2017 and...
It feels like yesterday.
I know. And I feel like that... that's testimony enough, right? But also Nerys is here because she has really been a great... I'm gonna sound very cliche, but I'm gonna say role model. Because
7 years, by the way, not 10.
What do you mean?
If you've met her since 2017, it's been 7 years.
Yes, almost 10 years.
Well, we're not mathematicians.
We're not mathematicians.
I only heard 10. I'm running on like 5 hours of sleep. I'm sorry.
English major.
Almost 10.
Yeah, almost 10. But yeah, so far 7. And it's been really a wonderful friendship that's just grown because, like I said, I really feel there are a lot of women in my life that I'm lucky to know, right? 2 of them right here. But I feel that Nerys had really given me the gift of, giving myself permission to do a lot of the things that I felt really pathetic about. And it's very appropriate that today kind of sparks something that she told me. She's like, because I feel like I was the one at the table that brought it up. Like, yeah, I don't like gossiping or I don't like saying this. And she was like, no, gossip is a good thing. And I was like, oh. And then I just started thinking. And I feel like this is literally, coming to fruition with that. That is the kind of footprint that has been Nerys' friendship.
Well, let me interject for a second.
Yes, of course.
I was not expecting that introduction. So, I will say, hi, podcast listeners. Thank you for having me, and also thank you guys for having me too. Because I'm a big fan of your podcast. Longtime listener.
Yay.
And I feel the same way about actually the two of you. You know, you guys are also people that I look up to and, you know, that I love to work with, and that, you know, I just always feel so like honored when you're sharing like information, and like when I listen to your podcast and your conversations, I'm always like, wow, I never thought about, you know, travel in that sense, or I never thought about friendship or growing up like in that way. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and to talk about gossip with like two people that I find, you know, very inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
We're so happy to have you on the show. I'm always happy to have more people on our podcast. I think the interview episodes are always so special because we bring in a different perspective, right? So I'm excited to dive into this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like
This is a
high
juicy
tea.
one.
Yeah, this is juicy.
This is actual high tea.
High tea.
The real tea starts.
And speaking of real tea, we do have tea with us today. We have ginger tea today.
Smells so good.
Straight up ginger with lemon juice that
Mhm.
Pam did the honors of squeezing for us today.
Thank you, Pam.
Taking a sip today.
Sip time, sip break.
Sip break. And just to talk a little bit about why we're drinking ginger tea today. Well, one, it's one of the teas that doesn't upset Nerys because she's pregnant. And
Woohoo!
that's
Yes.
always a clear choice. And we come to find that, you know, she's actually sharing with us today that ginger tea was actually recommended to her for many reasons. And we're even finding out that ginger tea is actually great for treating inflammation, not only, you know, for drinking tea, but also applying it onto your skin. There's lots of medicinal things that we're just even superficially reading right now that treat acne, and also mixing it with honey to kind of create like a paste for skins. It also relieves nausea, morning sickness, which Nerys was sharing that she drank a lot of ginger tea for. But also to say that drinking ginger tea, I think I'm actually remembering a friend that Nerys and I shared that his name, I don't remember his name right now, but he had Crohn's disease, and he actually told us that whenever he was feeling really reactive, like Crohn's was acting up, he would drink ginger tea to help with, you know, the inflammation of, you know, the symptoms that kind of come up from Crohn's disease. So cheers to ginger tea. Cheers to the root. Cheers to the antioxidants in ginger. And, you know, join us, have some ginger tea. And if not, drink some soon.
Yes.
But without further ado, we're going to go into our topic today, which is, you know, what you guys have already heard a little bit about. Gossip. So it's funny because I, like many of you, really thought of the word as a bad thing, right? And when that moment happened with Nerys, I actually really started thinking about it. I started thinking about all the associations the word had and all the things that kind of came with calling someone like a gossiper or to gossip. And I realized that a lot of its connections were really connected to me specifically because I'm a woman, right? I have very close women friends, and that's what we do, right? And that's a very modern take, right, on the word and the meaning of gossip. But what I want to do is introduce us to a little bit of etymology of the word gossip. So we're going to start off in Old English, right? Because, drum roll, right? The word actually came from the Old English Church. The word godsib, Godsib, like sibling, right?
That's crazy.
Right. And its breakdown, God being a noun, deity, right? And the adjective sib is kinship, friend, right? A lot of you are thinking of the word sibling. You're correct, right? And of course, the word expanded to kind of refer to someone. It didn't have to be a male or female. It was a gender neutral word, right? It's just like a status, right? Like this was somebody who you relied on, right? This was somebody who within the church community, because again, this word as its spelling, as it existed now, was church social setting, was someone that you could confide in, right? And it was a status because, as I'm sure a lot of you are probably thinking, this eventually turned into the kind of role of godparent, right? But godsib came before it because godparent likewise is also a role. But this was more of a status. Godsib is like status. You're like, oh, it's like saying bestie. You're my bestie. You're my bestie in the church. And this is, by the way, all in medieval transcripts. So things that have kind of represented medieval times, this is how the word was used.
Ye old godsib.
Ye old godsib. And eventually, we started to see a shift to godsib to being something that happened between friends, right? Something, and it wasn't a status, it was more of an action. And this was specifically happening with English clergymen and poets because they occupied both roles, right? One specifically that's credited from wordorigin.org is Thomas Drant. He started writing the word closer to how it's spelled today, Gossip, gossip, to attribute it to women specifically. So it changed from being this kind of gender neutral, status to a trait that he used specifically around women. And it
Cursed him.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until 1631 when Michael Drayton started using it as a verb to gossip, meaning to engage in rumor mongering. So we went from something that was a word that meant so many positive things, right? So much grace, so much sacredness, confidence, right? Friend, kin, to now an action that has a that has pretty much an interesting, I feel like presence, right, in our society. And
Sounds like someone got dumped at
Yeah.
some point. So
That's that John Mayer of that team. You old John Mayer.
yeah.
the John Mayer of the day. So I wanted to just interrupt a little bit of this like etymology background and just
Which
ask.
is fascinating. by the
Yeah,
way.
I'm really
I'm
happy.
like blown away.
I'm happy to have discovered it, and I'm already feeling, just having done the research, a little bit better about being somebody who gossips, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm like, okay, this is definitely not something I should have been afraid of or ashamed of, right? So, but before we get into more, I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think of the verb as it stands today, to gossip, right? We can talk about, gossip you've engaged in without I think incriminating anybody, but what does that space or action mean to you in your own words and your own practices? Let's start with Nerys.
Okay. Well, to me, and this is why I told you, like, gossiping is not a bad thing. I know, gossiping is a very layered, or very like charged action, right? But to me, I think it's also like almost like survival. Sometimes, with your friends, right? You look out for each other, and you whisper and you talk about certain things, right? You have conversations that are maybe like, in the shadows and stuff, right? You have like conversations that you can only have, in a certain space or with that certain person, right? To kind of warn them about something or to, look out for them. Really, it could be, you're looking out for people. So I'm not sure when, and I guess, that's what the episode is about, but I'm not sure when like just like a conversation becomes like gossip, right? I don't know what, I'm not sure like what is that triggers it, but to me it's like, almost like a place of like safety, and like, I like that you use the word sacred, because it is a sacred conversation or exchange, I think, with someone.
I feel like the word, it's interesting to hear its origin, right? And I'm not, again, I mentioned this before in the podcast. I wasn't brought up religiously. It was more like we did religious things traditionally, right, as part of ritual. I don't know the actual biblical context behind it, but I feel like I've often heard that gossip is a sin, right? I could be wrong, but I feel like that kind of idle chat. So it's so interesting to hear that the origin of the word comes from religion. So it's like how far back does this disconnect with actual biblical text within society go? Like, it's kind of mind-boggling that we take this word that, again, it's emphasizing a relationship, right? It's emphasizing togetherness, this sort of closeness with somebody, and has been manipulated and twisted to separate people. And so it almost makes me want to do more research into that time when this guy, Thomas Drant and Michael Drayton, right?
Lots of Englishmen names.
Yes. Like, what was happening during those times that the narrative was changed with this word and chosen to have a negative connotation, right? Like, what kind of battles or issues in the whatever villages that they lived in occurred for that kind of shift to happen? Because a lot of it, we all know that words evolve, they all change, the meanings change all the time, and they're always for a reason, right? For a specific purpose, to accomplish a specific message. So it's so interesting to see that change, that twist. And I think that for me, the line kind of crosses over from conversation to gossip once it becomes more like speculation, right? Once it becomes more of the intent of, you're not really truly wanting to understand the person, you're just wanting to contribute to the intangible untruth, right, of this person, and contribute and continue to build on that negativity, because a lot of it is usually, when we think about it negatively, right, it's
That's
bringing out the negative, any negative stories that you don't know whether they're true or not. And so it's almost like enabling this behavior of continuing the lie versus speculation or trying to figure out what's something happening. So I think, like, for me, that's where that line is drawn versus godsib and gossip. Right? Like, if we're gonna take it in the modern terms, okay, it's the intent. So if your intention is to continue the harm and not really address the fact of this might not be true, and helping the people understand, right, like, this is just speculation, we don't know what it is, these are all assumptions, we can have a good time talking, trying to think and infer, because I think that that's something where it's why it's so much fun to talk about, right? You're thinking about different possibilities, but it's you're practicing and flexing that muscle of like brainstorming, of thinking about different ways, and it's almost a way of contributing to that storytelling urge that I feel as humans we have to make connections and build relationships. But as soon as it becomes something of not really wanting to seek the truth, just wanting to seek damage to someone's reputation, that's when it draws the line.
Right. Yeah, you're kind of saying two words there, right? Like, you're saying gossip and rumor, and then you're kind of drawing the line from gossip and rumor to when rumor comes into gossip, right? Or rumor gets created in gossip, I think.
Yeah.
Right? That's the more...
It's like two
harmful
results with gossips. One of them good, one of them bad.
And I will add to that. I know we're we are talking from like our like female like experience, right, or girl experience, but everybody gossips. Like everyone engages in gossip. It's just like, I feel that when a woman does it, right, it's like, oh, chisme, that's gossip, that's tea, that's this, is that, right? And then when someone else does it, a man, or whatever. I don't want to pick on men.
We'll do it for you.
What is it then? Like, is it gossip, or is it?
No, that's what they call water cooler talk.
Right. Locker room talk, or
we're catching up.
Yeah.
Right.
Or news.
Oh yeah. Yes. Which
so
leads me into two other things next, because Nerys kind of just hinted at it. the last bit of this etymology lesson is the kind of last trace of evolution or really significance of the word gossip, still in its modern spelling, because, it never changed again, Gossip, gossip. It was in the end, or by the end of the 18th century, the verb, right, was turned back into a noun, right? But it didn't mean person anymore, right? Like when we started, right? Now it meant to rumor, which is funny because Pam just kind of distinguished that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a noun that was synonym to rumor, to talk, right? And it was actually because of newspapers using it in their headlines, where it was basically a section of the newspaper where they say, Justin Bieber gossip. And then they say whatever news they have about Justin Bieber there on the headline, right? I'm sorry, there in the piece, which is interesting because now I feel like we're seeing where the derogatory comes in, right? And it's still very interesting to me that nowhere in this etymology we really see women, right? We really see an industry, right? All of these positions, all of these statuses, these industries, quote unquote, are majority of men, right? Clergymen, poets, especially in the medieval and Old English times, and even in printing press, we're still seeing men use this word. So my next question is, why do we think gossip is connected to women?
Yeah.
Right? And I guess I'll start with Pam this time.
I mean, I feel like regardless of what we think, it's the history's there, right? Men chose to connect it to us, and whatever that reason is, again, I would love to speak to a historian, and I would love to see a historian and linguist come together and solve this puzzle for us, because, the history is telling us that this is where it came from, right? It's this idea of, even with the newspaper, what is it that they need? They need people, they need interest, they need people to come in and buy their newspapers and read it. And so they'll do what it takes to twist, and in this case, even change whole definitions of words to their benefit. So I feel like I've never actually really deeply thought about why the word was specifically connected to women. And I think that's just because of the nature of our society, right? Like, there's a lot of things that we grow up being told this is just it, and that's how it is, and not really given context or why it is the way that it is, and you just have to accept it and not question it. And so it's not really something that I've actually thought about, but to hear now the history of it, it's just such a shame that based off just what we heard now, it just feels like, a group of non-minorities decided, and right, this is what we also know, right? The winner is the one who writes the history. And that's what they decided this word was going to be. And it was going to be for women. And it could have been maybe at the time to, I assume, kind of put them in their place, bring them down in some way. Because I'm sorry, the fact that this word was gender neutral and then someone decided to assign it a gender, it's almost like that's a trend you start to see when you look at history, that before, in ancient times, they didn't give a shit about gender. It was like, this was it. We're all human. And now all of a sudden, for reasons known at that time, right, or whatever prejudices started to grow from those times, they decided we have to start. And I think it comes from power, right? A need for someone to be in a place of power. And in order to be in a place of power, you need to make other groups of people feel less than.
Which is interesting you bring that up, because so something in my mind that kept on circling, right, was the fact that gossip, to me, if I had to answer this question, why is gossip attributed to women? Well, because they, for the longest time, did not have power. So they were very much communicating with each other forcefully in secret.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened when they were doing the things that, you know, women had to do in the household, the laundry, taking their husbands out because they had to go somewhere socially, and in each other's homes because they were at home taking care of children, right? So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there's a power dynamic that's related to this word, right? And of course you're saying because the kind of designation it had was so negative because of the power that the person who named it was. And you know, it's because men a lot of the times weren't invited to the conversations, but mostly because they left the women there. So
Yeah.
there was no invitation needed. They just, you know, weren't in that setting. They weren't in that confidence, you know, that gossip required. But that's definitely a power conversation. You know, that's very interesting. And I'm so excited to hear.
Yeah.
Jump in.
I kind of agree, right, with your take on that, because it does feel like it, you know, women, I guess had to weaponize gossip because they weren't, you know, center stage, right? They kind of had to work, again, going back to like shadows and stuff. And I guess just, and I think they even, I would say, you know, depending on like the status they had, right, in society, a lot of their gossip work was also like to benefit their husbands. Like it was just like almost like a way for them to raise their family status and their family name, and like use, you know, who you have a conversation with, who you bond with, who you like sit in a parlor with and have tea, you know.
The beginnings of networking.
Right. It was like networking. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of what it feels to me, like, you know, and based on like, you know, media, right, and things that we consume, it feels like it was like the only way they had to, you know, have some kind of like relevancy, right? And I do feel like the moment where it became like, oh, like that's just, you know, women gossiping and stuff like that, it's, you know, it's a little bit to discredit, right, going back to the point I think you both made, discredit, you know, the little bit of power they did have, because you know, it was like this almost like passive aggressive, right, like power, but it worked, and I think it still works, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't matter who does it. I think it still does work.
Yeah, I think people hate that it works.
Yeah, people are very fearful of it. I think that's again going back to the negative connotation of it. I think people are really afraid of that, and like, you know, and even of going back to like having a confidant and having like a godsib. Some people are also intimidated by those relationships, like those friendships, right? And a lot of, you know, I don't want to go off on like a weird tangent, but
no, it's okay.
You know,
go there. We go there all the time.
Sometimes, yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about, you know, just like let's talk about just abusive relationships real quick. You know, a lot of people, men or women, right, who are trying to control their partners, they immediately want them to cut off any like other bonds that they have. Those are the godsibs, right? Your besties, your confidants, people that you know will tell you, you know, be honest with you, right? So again, I don't know. It's just it is about a power struggle, and it's really interesting. It's fascinating.
I feel like that's probably what happened, because if you think about it, this word came from religion. It was brought up from clergymen, and it was changed by a clergyman. So what other reason is there, really? Like, if you think about it logically, there could be other things that we don't know about it. But if with the context of all the information that we have, something must have happened where these relationships were so strong that it could have been that at that time these relationships could have maybe even challenged some of the things that the church were saying, right? Or like there had to have been some sort of rise of like power in probably women, because that's who was targeted for this word to be changed.
That's a good point.
And even us talking about this right now and the power that women had, like the first thing that popped into my head was the play that we saw that Caitlin directed, right? Lysistrata. Because,
yeah.
or yes, sorry. And
Shout out to Caitlin. We miss
Shout
you.
out to Kat.
she's here in spirit. She's
here in
like
spirit.
sprinkling
She
her play.
she really is here in spirit, especially with
Aw.
what things like Nerys had just said,
Yeah.
which I feel like you're remembering, right?
Exactly, because that whole play is just the power of all of these women getting together, the idea that they were able to protest much longer than these men gave them credit for. They completely discredited their power of togetherness, and the whole time they were just talking, doing the things that they would do in the household. And the reason why they're able to survive, because they were the ones who did all of the housework and knew how to cook and knew how to fix things and knew how to grow plants, right? While the men were suffering because they didn't know how to do any of that stuff. And they were able to create these connections, have conversations with each other, build these relationships. And so, to me, that's what makes sense. It's the fact that it probably came from this idea of discrediting the power that women probably were starting to gain through these relationships.
Right.
Yeah, and also, because I don't have the play in front of me, but I know it was an adaptation of Lysistrata. Lysistrata, exactly. But something that because you reminded me of it, Nerys, was that even Kat, Pam, and I were speaking a little bit about confidence and how we're at an age right now where we have no shame in telling somebody, like the moment you start a sentence with, "Can I tell you something that you can't tell anyone?"
I love those moments. You know something's good. Good is coming after that.
And I agree, right? And I loved that Kat had even brought up. She's like, "Okay, yes, girl, but also I'm gonna tell my boyfriend."
Yeah.
Just so you know.
Just so you know, I am too.
Yeah. Yes.
I am
you
multiple.
I am you are gonna tell me, and you're gonna tell my boyfriend because you're telling me. Which is so funny, because I agree. She said that, and I agree, because that is, she even said it yesterday, it's transparency. I want to be honest with you, and I do want you to trust me. And by trusting me, you're going to trust someone who's equally like they are me, right? They're an extension of me. They are the most important person to me. So you're part of that in a way, which is, and I really thought about it, and I even think about it much more affectionately because of what you just said. It's just an extension of confidence and kinship. Godsib.
Yeah.
Godsib. There's also a really fine line that we're kind of teetering here, is that, it's no secret that women also build up so much social structure. We are feeding and constantly, very active in social structures of our society. And I think that's amazing. I think a lot of people will say, like, "Oh, well, women are so emotional, and, women like are too invested in pop news, or they're the ones that, feed these like social media." Like, we all know that the majority of users on social media are women, right? And that, I feel like, is just, again, an extension of the history that we've lived. We did have most of our influence, most of our presence in social settings, right? With what examples like Nerys just gave of, even influencing on behalf of one's husband, one's family, improving their structure, improving their status. And I know that might all sound to somebody really negative and really manipulative, but we're still going back to the source, that this is where women thrive. And we never once think that men having, an industrial mindset, right? Or a quote unquote cold, right? Or maybe not as attached surface as women do, as a bad thing, right? Everyone thinks it's an amazing thing, right? And that, to me, I don't share. I don't think it's good to be cold or disconnected, right? I don't think it's good to be unaffected by what's happening to people around you that you love, right? I don't. And also, this is a funny thing, because Nerys and I share a friend that always says this, that everybody thinks men are emotional, but he's the first person to say that most of the men he knows are irrational, emotional beings. So we also know that, stereotypes have some truth, but also are not always true, right?
They
They
just have
only-
a lot of staying power. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, they only show one side of the coin, right?
Yeah.
One specific angle of the picture that you're looking at. And even as we were talking, something that popped into my head, and I don't really know how this coincides in terms of like the timeline of the history of the word, but the idea that women were pinned as witches, right? Because of this power that they have to lure or have covens and they get together. So
Right.
I'm sure that extends into it.
Right.
This idea of like, what are these women doing? They're getting together. They're getting ideas like in the play.
Yeah.
Right.
We have to stop them. They're not listening to us. They're not behaving. They're not being obedient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They want a career or
They want to own land.
they want a divorce or own land. And suddenly they're like, she must be a witch.
How dare you?
How dare you?
And oh wait, go ahead, Nerys.
No, I was just nothing.
It was filler. It was filler. It was like my mind is
Yeah.
That's
My mind is just going like 1,000 miles per hour because every time you guys say something, I'm like, yeah, that's amazing. So interesting. Let's unpack that. Let that be a whole episode.
It could be. It could be. I think, right, something that witches, it's funny I said that and I just thought I said witches like coven. Witches, now I can't stop hearing it. Anyway, women to me, I feel like even as a child, right, I could feel the difference between being around, my boy cousins, my uncles, my, paternal characters in my family versus the maternals, my tias, my tiabuelas, my mom, right? My mom's friends. Even being around, well, first of all, my dad had no friends. My dad had no friends to introduce his children to. He never did. Even when he did have coworker friends at work, we never met them.
Sus.
Yeah, sus. You're sus, guy. How can you not have friends? And my mom was like, my mom's friends came to visit her in the hospital. They spent time with her. They helped take care of her. They were at her funeral. And before, when she was alive and well and doing her day-to-day, when I was at work with her, I just felt like I was at another piece of home, right? Which is kind of going back to what you said, Nerys, about a place being safe, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, it wasn't all women either, might I add, right? But it was definitely a space that I felt led by my mom, and there were men in that space. There were other women in that space. And it was like tangible, the temperature, the feel, everything was different, right? Because was there gossip? Yes. But at its like base source, I feel like what attributes gossip and social settings and women, right, is kinship, is familiarity, comfort, and also vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
I felt those things and I could not name them at all, but I really did feel them like in those spaces where I was with her friends. I was with her when she was like, gossiping with my aunt over, our pool days with my cousins, right? And I remember those feelings very significantly, right? They were like comforting to me, right? Like good tea, like sitting here with you guys, it's like very
nice warm hug.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Such echoes of that, right? So while we, are also saying that so much negativity surrounds women and gossip, I feel like there's also so much positivity, so much power, so much good and warm energy that comes around women navigating social settings with gossip and really kinship and friends, right? And creating homes and spaces for people to interact, right?
Mhm.
So I hope that really connects women to good things and moving away more so from like the rumor mongering thing.
Yeah. So other words, right, that we use for gossip are cheese and tea, and these are delicious.
Cheese, tea, and
You know, so going back to positivity, these
Yes.
are delicious imageries, you know, that come to mind.
And they taste
sensations.
better the longer they're aged.
Yes,
Ooh.
like women.
Like women.
Like a good bottle of wine.
Put that on a shirt, Pam. And also, I think now it's even taken a connotation of like truth.
Mhm.
Like, tell me the tea, girl.
Mhm.
You know? And I love also that no matter what like sexual orientation or gender says it, it's always accompanied with girl.
Yeah,
Like tea girl.
girl. Yeah,
Yeah. It's a
Love it.
promotion, you know,
Yeah.
to be called tea
Mhm.
girl.
yeah.
And of course we've talked about some spaces that gossip lived in, right? And where it evolved. In your guys' opinion, where do you think gossip, right, lives and serves you now? Whether it be, you know, in life, at home, you know, kind of attributing to all the great traits we said. What do you guys think? Start with Nerys.
Okay, so first, I'm just gonna name. I'm gonna let me just go back for a second. Tess and I had already talked about like spaces like briefly, so I'll just like unpack that in my head. First, so we were talking about, you know, disenfranchised people, right? And then how you have to resort to gossip because of, you know, being powerless. So then you have to, you know, going back to shadows and stuff like that. So, you know, places I thought of were, you know, alleys, corners, hallways, you know, kitchens, right? Which can be kind of like the heart of the home. I think that's what you said. But
Yeah.
also like a very private space, right? Because not everyone can do things in the kitchen, right? Only certain people. So it's almost, you know, like a, you know, protected space. And then the other part of your question, how you know, how does it serve me? Okay. So I would say like very plainly, like that's kind of how I bond with a lot of the women in my life. You know, when my mom and I are going on walks and she's like, Te tengo una, you know, I have one for you. I'm like, yes, okay. Like the walk is going to be fun. You know, I'm going to hear something about like, you know, someone at her job or, you know, just whatever. Like and it's interesting, you know, and it's fun. And we try to find solutions to whatever the problem is. We're like, well, what if they did this, you know? Can you like try suggesting this thing next time you talk to them, right? So, which I know we do, right? We try to fix like all these problems. Or we, you know, we're like, well, you know, pobrecita, you know, I still feel so bad for that person. Oh, well, you know,
Nothing we can do.
nothing you can do now. So yeah, it's just like to bond, you know, to catch up, right? When you haven't heard, you know, from someone in a long time. So yeah, it's just like bonding. I don't think we use it as like you know, like we don't like weaponize it to hurt anybody, obviously, you know. But I can definitely see how it can shift, you know, to that. Yeah.
I think that for me, it's pretty much the same, right? It's this idea of creating, in terms of how it serves me, it's this idea of bonding, especially at this time of my life. You guys, as you get older, it gets so hard to schedule times to meet with your friends. There's like a lot of stuff that just comes into the way. And so I find it's interesting because I'm trying to think about even how young people today might take gossip, right? And I feel like because of social media and how much information we feel compelled, especially the younger generation, that they feel compelled to share, I don't know if gossip is something that really comes up in their generation, because everything is just so like, look, this is what I did, right? It's so much of showcasing and putting on a show online. And so I don't know if that's something that they struggled with in the same context that we did.
That is so
right?
interesting.
That is very
Because
interesting.
of that distinction. And so, even think about the shows that we watched growing up. They were like 90210, Gossip Girl, they like Pretty Little Liars. They all revolved around groups of women and rumors that spread. And now when you look at the shows now, like, it's none of that, right? It's more about being more adults in the sense of going out, drinking, doing sexual things, but that's not necessarily the the little gossiping thing and spreading rumors. They're more intense, right? Like, I'm even thinking of Euphoria, right? The kinds of like heavy topics that the youth now are surrounded in media from. And so I don't know where it lives for them. And it's almost sad in a way, right? Like a little bit of a mourning of this idea of this is how much of heavy reality that they're being exposed to at a much younger age. And even the idea of getting together, like now it's all about fitness and health and vitamins and all of this stuff, and being so skinny and fit and being a gym person, a gym rat. And so I don't know if they have the space for that, right? Because there's such a persona that they have to put out there depending on whatever niche they feel that they fit in. But I think that with my life and where I'm at my age of 30, gossip I find it surrounds food, right? It becomes something that, even when we were talking about earlier, give me the cheese, give me the tea, dish it out. It's all food related, right? We want to consume it, we want to eat it up, but with friends, surrounded by food and good spirits. And it's the idea of welcoming, of warming, of coming together. And it feels so good that, at least for our generation, it's kind of almost gotten back to the root of the word, right? Of that kinship, of that relationship, and strengthening those bonds. But it's so interesting to think about that, right? Like, wow, this was something that was so negative for us, but now I almost wish this was something compared to some of the stuff that I see the youth struggling with now, But yeah.
Pam, that was beautiful. That's all for today. That was amazing.
Yeah. And just to expand on it, some things I thought of, because it's a fuse, I agree. Like, I bond with people that tell me, things that they, that happened to their loved ones or that they care about, and it happened and it affected them, and they're telling me this. And that kind of intrinsically taught me a little bit more about empathy.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I know a lot of those, hey, I'm going to tell you something, but don't tell anybody, is like, hey, this person's going through this, so don't bring that up, or don't, because it's also, you're just looking out for each other, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
The amount of times that gossip has been shared to me at work to help me do my job has been immeasurable.
Imagine, gossip as a resource.
Yes.
Because it is, if I know that something's going on, right? Like what Nerys said, and I need something from somebody, I'm like, I am going to make this process, this exchange, this transaction as intentional as I can, because I know this information, and I'm not gonna use it to torture somebody else or just ignore it and then be like, like cool and detached, because that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like those nuances are lost because of what you just said, Pam. The whole, they're not doing this exchange anymore. They're just kind of projecting themselves at all times with that type of culture, right? Of like, well, like, look at me on my day at the gym, right? Or look at me on my day going to the library and studying, which are all not bad things, right? But it's just you and your self-image rather than...
Well, and you by yourself.
Yes.
Not making connections, not talking to people.
No.
Yeah, and when you were bringing that up, I mean, there was so many great points, but when you were talking about, I think you said social media, but
Mm-hmm.
anyway, the way that I feel like we use gossip, going back to dishes, right? It's just the pacing of it, right? A gossip, like it's just something that like builds and it's slow and you savor it and and I do feel kind of bad because, I didn't really grow up with a phone. A phone came later, right, in my teenage years. I feel like now kids have a phone like immediately, right?
I mean, they have iPads out too.
They have iPads. Yeah. So they, information is just so, they're just like overly stimulated all the time. Information is just so like in their face, like constantly, so they never really get to kind of maybe bond with people in that sense. Like, we say bonding, right? But that's because, that's just sort of like how it happened because of, globalization and no phones or whatever. Like, but it's interesting how maybe their relationship with gossip is different. So maybe that could be.
I mean, I don't even know if particularly they would even have one.
Right.
Right? Because Caitlin was mentioning to us yesterday, like, kind of sharing with us some of the stories of when she would put on shows for schools. And the idea of how some of her shows had to change to teach students how to even have basic interactions with humans, right? Having them understand this is not a screen. These are real people. And I even I was at a conference for work, and there was someone there who had given a presentation who also asked a question during one of the sessions. Or not a question, but I guess like wanted a reminder to give all of us to be mindful of sometimes it's not that the kids are not reading the directions, they're just not processing it. Like they can't process past the first sentence. And so you could ask them to read, but they don't know, right? It's like in one ear out the other. It's like all automatic because of that doom scrolling, because they're just so used to just like quick changes and constant changes to what they're seeing and not having to voice anything, just tap it, not have any interactions with it. And so this idea that these kids are growing up not learning how to be human, not learning how to be social. We are some of the most social beings on this earth.
Right.
Like everywhere you look, there's always been clusters of people that come together and build their tribes or build or whatever and build a sense of identity together
to survive.
And they don't have that.
Yeah.
And have that instinct.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty sophisticated, I guess, form of communication when you like empathy and connecting and
absolutely understanding the other person. I don't even know if they understand sympathy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're kind of going to empathy because that's like the graduated version of sympathy, right? But yeah, even at sympathy, sometimes I question what is actually penetrating, right? Because also those age groups that Kat was mentioning yesterday, they're like grade school, some high school, and there are ranges. She even admitted that, right? Where there were ranges of reactions where the high schoolers were probably a little bit better, right?
Or depending on the demographic too of the students and how well the school is, whether they have the resources, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think she compared a high school that was really well resourced and it had lots of teachers, smaller classrooms, and the students were fantastic. Right?
That makes sense.
Versus the underserved schools with the larger classrooms.
Higher ratio, right? Teacher
can't afford the attention.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The one-on-one attention, which I would like to say is also a nuance of gossip. It is that one-on-one attention.
Yeah.
You know, it is. I think no matter what, it is very one-on-one attention. And I think women thrive there, funny enough, because women are exceptional educators, right? And they are exceptional caretakers of various industries. But I have never seen so much magic in a woman, whereas she takes care of someone she loves, she cares about, she knows that is going to need her, and I've seen women do this to people that did not deserve it at all, but it has happened. And it as invigorating and inspirational as it is, it's kind of telling how devalued and demystified it is, because we, and the big we, the royal we, kind of look at the goal as isolation. I can do it all on my own, right? I can finance my vacations by myself, right? Which is great goals, right? Of course, financial stability is amazing. But when you kind of, like what Pam is saying, like when you have that image of just being on your own and living in a cone, and your goal is to live on the island by yourself, you know, that's when I start to question how much that's actually going to serve you. You know, how much is that going to be a really a goal to reach and enjoy, being on your own and not having those connections? I think a lot of people idolize being alone, right? Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with having some alone time, but nuances.
Yeah.
Do they idolize being alone, or do they idolize independence?
That's a good question.
You know, I'm not sure, but I do feel, right, I'm not sure. But I do feel like I mean, I don't want to devalue independence. I think independence is wonderful, and I think people should be self-sufficient. But I do feel like, you know, it's almost like a myth, right? Because I am what I am because I am being witnessed by the people around me, you know, people I care about, or strangers, right? Without them, my identity, I wouldn't be able to have the identity I have, right? So I think, you know, and I think that's beautiful. I think it's wonderful that we are working in, you know, it's a work in progress, and that we all need each other for that. Independence is great, but it's really just a myth at the end of the day, because we all need each other. We all, you know, we all use each other. And I don't mean use necessarily in a negative connotation, but we're all resources for each other, you know? So that's my take on that real quick.
Yeah. Yeah, because I do think there is this margin of value, because I'm remembering something that Pam said about knowing yourself and being able to, like, really know who you are by being alone, which I think is good. I'm not at all thinking about striking that out of the...
I don't want to oversimplify.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Because that's also a service to yourself.
Absolutely.
Whereas I feel like there's a gray line that you cross when you say, well, now I don't need anything else, right? Well, no, you're supposed to find out who you are so that you can be a better person for those you care about, right? You can be a better friend, a better partner, a better coworker, because you know, you're aware of who you are when you're by yourself, when you're in relationships with others, when you're in different settings, when you're meeting new people. You're not trying to blur the line and just turn into whatever person you're with either, right? Like, you have to remember who you are. But I don't think there's a line where, or sorry, I do think there's a line where you're like, okay, I've reached some form of you know, analysis to what I've spent with myself so far. Let me go try it out. You know?
Yeah.
Let me go apply this, you know, outside these four walls where it'll actually matter, right?
Yeah.
And I think I've loved and I've enjoyed so much that this conversation has gone from one word to one social stereotype to a gender to now kind of the fundamentals, right, of interacting with people, you know, not only right next to you, but in our society, right? Like, you do know that you need nuance as anything, really.
We don't exist in a vacuum, right? We're our memories, we're our conversations, we're the people that, you know, form us and inspire us, right? Like, you started the conversation talking about that, right? And then I reciprocated by saying how much you guys inspire me. So all of that shapes me. All of that shapes, you know, who we are, we want to be.
It's what makes us human.
Yeah.
Looking
And I
at
love
you,
that.
AI.
Looking at you,
Pam.
Chatty.
Wilson.
Now we're really done.
Wow, thanks.
The last question, which I will say I feel like we answered already, but I will open it up for anyone who wants to expand on anything, just because they should hear it. Why are these spaces sacred? Why are these practices sacred? And I will reiterate, it's what makes us human. Gossip is not a woman. Gossip is not a woman trait. It's not a woman verb, right? It's not a noun referring to women. It is a practice. It is a training ground for you to really learn and develop skills that are not just about yourself, which are so valuable. This skill, it goes way beyond your scope of identity, right? And your scope of image.
Yeah. I mean, and to add on to that, I agree. And logically, historically, right? It's sacred because it came from sacred religion context. But at the same time, if you think about it, like spiritually and otherwise, it is sacred because of all of the things that we've mentioned before, the level of vulnerability that it takes to be able to tell somebody, this is my truth and I am entrusting this truth to you. When we are social beings, but society being as judgmental as it is, we're also social beings that feel like we need to put on a specific mask with specific groups of people or specific, societies. And so this idea that gossip or godsib, it takes a certain level of trust. It takes a certain level of breaking down those boundaries, trying to take that leap of faith, because you can't control this other person, right? As long as you have been talking, as long as you've been interacting and engaging, it takes a blind belief and a trust in them to hope and pray that they will respect your decision, that you're sharing this piece of you with them, and that they will treasure it and that they will respect it in the way that you're asking them to. And so that's why I think it's so sacred, right? And why it's such a human trait, because everybody needs to be able to have a certain level of vulnerability that they can expose to somebody so they can feel human, so that they feel understood, so that they feel I'm not alone, because that at the end of the day, nobody wants to be alone.
They feel witnessed.
Right.
Yeah.
They feel heard, they feel seen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why to me it's so sacred, because you're showing somebody your true self, and at the end of the day, it's them accepting that, right? No judgment. I understand this and I will keep this for you, right? I will treasure this for you. You are giving me your treasure and I will treat it as such.
Thank you, Pam. That was really warm.
That was beautiful. Pam's killing me today.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree. Basically my worst fear about coming to the podcast. I agree. So but yes, right, it's like it heals you, right? It's almost like, right, a lot of those conversations start with, you're seeking that validation. Am I crazy to think this, like, to have this opinion about this thing, right? And then when someone actually says, no, I agree because, of these other logical reasons, you don't feel like, out of touch or like you're being gaslighted. So I feel like it is like a very healing experience. When I catch up with my friends, right? Or even like after this, right? Someone's going to ask me about what I did this weekend, and I'm probably going to say, I did this thing, but it made me feel like it filled my cup, right? It filled my cup. It healed me. It made me feel, like I'm part of a community, right? And I feel like that's all a part of what you just said, right?
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. I don't want to say more because what you said was perfect.
No, but it was great. It was great. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm really, really lucky to not only have this and share this moment, right, with Nerys and Pam, but honestly to have shared my life so far with Nerys and Pam has been extremely filling my cup. I've never felt like, and even when I felt like my cup was empty, right? I remember like these are two women in my life, and I remember that, and I'm like, okay, I know I'm gonna be okay, right? So I'm gonna tell everybody out there to find their gossip friends,
Their godsib.
their godsibs.
Yes.
Let's make that a trend. We're gonna be what's that
Godsib.
girl from Mean Girls? What's her name?
Which one?
Which
The one who's
Regina?
like, yeah, no, the one that wanted to make
Gretchen
fetch.
Wieners?
Yes, we're gonna be Gretchen and make Godsib a
Gretchen.
thing.
We're gonna make
Yes. We're gonna get shirts. That's gonna be in the merch
That's
soon.
gonna be in the merch.
The High Tea Mystique merch.
That'll be our followers. They'll be our
Godsibs.
godsibs.
Oh
cute.
my god.
You all are our
That's
godsibs.
adorable.
Damn, check out, man.
Yeah.
Clock out.
Damn, okay.
Peace. And without letting you all go and saying goodbye, we are going to turn it over to the last segment of the episode, which is Pam's other specialty besides truth giving, tarot reading.
Yeah.
So take it away, Pam.
So, this episode has been a long time coming, right? And we've all been very excited to be able to talk about it. This idea of gossip. I love the fact that we've been able to dive into the history of it. And when I was looking at my tarot decks today to see which one I wanted to use, I was very drawn to this new deck called the Silver Witchcraft Tarot. And I think I was so drawn to it because of even the point that I mentioned earlier, right? This idea of this power dynamic and potential connections with maybe this is why women were called witches and all of those things. So this deck is beautiful. It has a lot of imagery even in the regular minor arcana. If you've heard me talk in the tarot episodes, some tarot decks may not have very descriptive pictures and they'll just have, like they just show 9 coins for the 9 of Pentacles. This one doesn't do that. And so as we were going through the episode, I was trying to think about what I would love to ask for the cards today. And I think what really resonates and what stands out the most, the biggest thread that ties all of this together, is this idea that at the end of the day, as human beings, right, we seek connection, we seek relationships, we seek to be a part of something greater and a part of a community. And so how can we do that, right? I want all of us to be able to find our godsib, someone that we can confide in, trust in, have a close relationship with. And a lot of the times, as we've mentioned in this podcast, in this episode, right, that can be a little bit scary to be vulnerable. And what are some even steps that I can take? I don't know how to do that. Maybe I used to do that before. I can't remember how to do that anymore. So I want to ask the cards for us, what's something to guide us, something that we should remember in terms of what we have to keep in mind when we're thinking of these relationships or who we should seek out to, right? Because we're also not saying just go out and tell everybody your dirty laundry.
Find your circle.
Right?
Find your circle.
It's supposed to be someone that you trust, and that takes baby steps to understand who is worthy of accepting this piece of you, this part of you that you're wanting to share and wanting to have a better understanding of, right? So that's what I'm going to ask the cards. Like, what is something that we should keep in mind of, that we should be mindful of when seeking these connections and these relationships?
That's so true. There are tiers to gossip. Like, you don't get the juiciest. You get like tier 1.
Yeah. That's true. That's next episode.
Wow. Okay. So I just want to preface with the idea, right, that where we're at right now, at the time of filming this, we are in Mercury retrograde still. And so I actually love that we're talking about gossip and this idea of communicating, right? And clarifying this misconception of this word during a time where energetically there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of, I don't want to say trauma, but the past comes back almost to haunt you. Lessons to be learned, details that you should pay attention to. And so it can be scary to move forward and to take those chances and those leaps of faith during these kinds of times where things feel like they're not working. Technology may go haywire. people, there's also eclipse is also upon us. I think a solar eclipse is coming up soon, and so all of those things affect us energetically. And I think the cards have such a beautiful message today. I feel like they always do. But the two cards that came out were the Strength card and the Magician. And these two cards are both major arcana. So I feel like these are very powerful, prominent energies that are going to be with us for a while. And they're also really positive cards, right? The Strength card, the image that this deck has, it's a person with a face, and it looks like, funny enough, it looks like the face is a mask almost, right? The head is in the shape of a leaf,
like a druid.
and it looks like, right, it looks like that person is holding up that mask, that face, and they're next to a lion, and they're almost like on a pedestal, on a podium. And so in the book, it says it represents intellectual, the god, astrologically, of course, Leo, and the element of fire because of the lion. In the description, it says a man holding a green man mask stands on a cube with a lion on his side. He gently lays his hand on the lion's mane as if on a pet. There are many kinds of strength. The strength of the tarot is not about brute force. Rather, it reflects something even more powerful, force under control. We all have power and access to power and can use for different purposes and in different ways. Here we have the green man, a symbol of fertility, vitality, and life force. He calms and controls the lion, not through overpowering it, but by accepting it. He does not try to change its nature, but rather helps it control itself. This is not to say that nature or our natural inclinations are bad. Indeed, it is the opposite. For we usually try to contain our urges and desires by a force of will, which leads to shame and repression, creating our shadow selves. These shadows may seem as if they are under control, but they are not, coming out at inappropriate times or inappropriate ways. When we accept and value all the parts of ourselves, we then become integrated. Nothing is deemed evil, and everything has its proper place in time. When the parts of ourselves that we denigrate, for example, anger, are valued, they can be channeled and used in beneficial ways. This takes great patience, courage, and strength. So, just the first card, right? I feel like echoes a lot of even what we've been saying about gossip and where maybe these changes have come from, and even the distinction of when it becomes good or bad, right? And it's this idea of, listen, this is innate, this is in all of us, but you are able to control it, and it's just about the balance of it and understanding and processing and responding appropriately versus reacting to certain things, right? Like, how are you using gossip? How are you using words? Is it to truly connect and make connections and develop kinship? Or are you trying to harm somebody, right? Are you trying to bring somebody else down for the sake of bringing yourself up? And it's not like you can stop it, right? The card is telling us these are natural urges, but it's not about the guy trying to control the lion, tame the lion. He's not a lion tamer. He's just sitting next to the lion and acknowledging and understanding its natural ways and kind of validating it, right? Like what we were saying earlier. Like, yes, you are a lion. You're going to roar. You're going to have these urges to want to eat meat. That's not bad.
Yeah.
Just do it in these ways, right? Or you can provide yourself in these ways, and you can control it within these contexts. And I think that because the card that follows it next to it is the Magician card, that is all the affirmation in the world. If you have any doubts while you're listening to us, of whether you can even develop these relationships or anything like that, because the Magician card is here, I want you to understand that you already have the power within you. And if this is really resonating with you, this episode is really calling out to you, take it as an affirmation, right? Like, you have that power to empower yourself, empower others, trust that person that you maybe have been trying to have an inkling or have been a little bit scared to take that leap of faith and give them a little bit of yourself. Do it. You know, like, you have the power to transmute that negativity as long as you understand that you have that control. You gave them a little bit. You can't control how they're going to take it. But if they take it negatively, that doesn't mean you're powerless, right? You have the control to make sure, okay, you couldn't handle that part. I'm not going to give you any more. That doesn't make you less than, right? And so for this card, it says some of the key things are material, the unknown, astrologically, Mercury, and it's the element of air. So in the description, it says a woman wearing a ritual robe is sitting cross legged on the cube and looking at the starry night. She holds an open book of shadows in her hand and points to the stars upward with the other hand. On her right hand, she has a bracelet with 4 pendants: a moon, a coin, a wand, and a theme. The moon is behind her, and even though it is night, she glows with such a light that between her and the moon, it doesn't seem dark. Traditionally, the magician card was a con man, someone who played tricks on people, usually with selfish intent. More recently, the magician has been elevated to someone who is well versed in magical skills or skills that may seem magical. But we forget that the magician is Arcanum 1, the beginning, and in many ways one of the first stages in magical understanding. She reads from a book to learn the concepts of magic. She practices what she learns, becoming accustomed to recognizing the ebb and the flow of the universe and to identifying the individual elements. The magician understands that magic is the art and craft of creating change in the world, of co creating with the universe. As she practices and experiments, not just reading but interacting with the energies and spirits, she learns that magic is deeper than that. She realizes that the most profound magic takes place within herself. By bringing herself into alignment with her own divine nature, she becomes a channel for the divine in the world. She is associated with the number 1 and with the unknown because this too is her great secret. No matter how much she learns or what she accomplishes, she will always be surprised by the universe and by herself. The divine is a mystery, and the magician's life is an expression of that mystery.
I'd just like to say that I think it's, so many things that you're going to get into, but I'd also like to point out that in the very commonly used Raider Weight deck, the strength card is a woman, and the magician is the man.
That's true.
Yeah, and we flipped those completely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We flipped they were flipped and we're reflipping them.
Yeah.
We're reflipping the narrative.
And it's your deck, which is why it's so special that it was
and
wanting to be used today.
yeah. And like this idea again that there is power within you, right? There is a sort of innate understanding that she is developing, learning from this, but also practicing, right? So it's this idea that it's going to take more than one attempt. Don't think that overnight you're going to have this miraculous kinship with somebody, right? Like that takes time to develop, and it's an ebb and a flow. It's a give and a take. It's going to be a cycle that you're going to have to go through, pay attention to the lessons that it's trying to teach you, right? Maybe this time this information was too much to give initially. Next time try to give a little bit less. Or maybe it's trying to help you to pay attention, right? There's like you kind of had a gut feeling about that person. So why did you try? Like I think this card compared to different descriptions of the magician that I've read in other decks, the bigger emphasis with this deck is this idea of there is mystery and the magician doesn't know everything, right? I feel like in other decks, it's this idea of even in the book, it said, right, it's usually a con man. It's someone who's trying to lead people on gain for selfish gain, and now it's twisted, right? It's different. It's this idea of woman in connection with nature, in connection with herself, and understanding that there is so much to learn, and there's so much that she has within her that she can learn from herself as well. And so don't discredit your own knowledge, your own gut, your own intuition, what it's trying to tell you when you're trying to make these connections, right? It's a part of that magic that you carry within yourself. And it's where you can lean on to be able to grow these beautiful relationships with people. And to kind of solidify this, at the bottom of the deck is the King of Wands, which interestingly enough When I first saw this card, I thought it was the King of Swords because this guy, he has fire, right? He has a fire in between his palms, but his crown and behind him are a whole bunch of like they look like daggers, but I'm assuming they're sort of gems or diamonds. And he also has a bag of treasures on his feet, right? But he's not looking at them. He's not looking at any of that. There's a palm tree next to him, so he's almost like desolate in this island, but still surrounded by treasure and with the fire that he needs for life in his hands, right? Like he holds it within his hands. And for this deck, the King of Wands, they call him the architect, knowing and doing about creativity. Description: a male is on a throne made of gems, holding a silver fire with both hands. A salamander has untied a knot that held close a sack full of riches. A single palm tree is keeping the king in shadow, protecting him from the heat. The King of Wands is very driven. He is a man of great vision, able to see incredible possibilities in the worst of circumstances. Through the sheer power of his will, he is able to turn sand into treasure and release great abundance into whatever he sets his hand to. He recognizes and values talent in others, but has no patience for those who won't work. His passion can turn to impatience and to anger if he feels he's been let down. So I feel like this is the perfect blend of these two cards, the Strength and the Magician, because it's the idea of you can transmute this. You have the power to change whatever relationship, whatever it is that you want to do. You have that. You can do it. But take notice what it says. It says he recognizes values and talents in others, but has no patience for those who won't work. So he understands, he knows what he's deserving of. He knows what people are capable of. And so he's not going to take anything less than. And he can take sand and make it to whatever it is that he wants. And he holds fire, one of the things that are essential for life, right? He holds it in the palm of his hands. He has no reason to look elsewhere for this fulfillment, for this magic. And so this idea that if you think, and this is speaking to anybody who maybe, as we've mentioned before, even in this episode, right? There is also this idea of toxic people. And like what they try to do is cut you off from other people. And, I want to empower you that if you've ever been in a situation like this, or if you are in a situation like that, you can make that change, right? To remove yourself, to better your situation. I'm not saying it's not going to take work, right? It takes a whole deck of cards before you can get to the king. You start all the way from the ace. But it's possible, and you're already on that path there because the strength card is here, because the magician card is here. They're all guiding you, and even the magician card has a beautiful full moon inside. So it's looking to nature. Maybe you need to take a break, go on a hike, go maybe go and do a mountain trail,
Talk to your
explore
friends.
some caves,
Talk to your friends.
a
Talk to
trip
your
with
girl.
friends, and understand who to listen to, who is really trying to help you, and who is trying to bring you back to make themselves feel better.
Yeah.
Because this king has no patience for it, and neither should you.
Yeah. But he listens probably. So listen and talk to your friends. It's a exceptionally immeasurable skill. So remember that.
Yeah.
I was looking at Nerys a lot because she's a Leo. So
Yes, you're welcome, everyone.
Wow. Well, for all of you listening, remember that the readings, I feel like they always come about with, energies that we've always put forward from talking to each other and sharing so much of our insight and our feelings and our thoughts and our ideas and our social, landscapes. But most importantly, this is also energy going outward to you. And hopefully, if this reading is resonating in parts, let it resonate, let it sink in, let it go to places that maybe you didn't know this episode was about, but now you're thinking about it. Ride that wave. let yourself, sink and spend time with your thoughts, because that's something that you're going to turn around and be like, can I tell you something that I just thought about? And you're going to bond and you're going to create gossip and you're going to create good friends. So before I say goodbye, I just want to open up to the ladies if we want to say anything else to our listeners.
You can do it. And most importantly to Nerys, thank you so much for being on this episode with us and for bringing this topic into light so we can have this wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for not dismissing this topic, right? 'Cause it's like it's an easy one to dismiss. I mean, I wasn't even suggesting it for the podcast, so I really appreciate you guys like inviting me and deconstructing it, and you guys just made it even like bigger than what I, was even thinking initially. So I hope everyone enjoys the episode. I hope everyone finds that person right in their lives to talk about the episode, and yeah, thank you so much. This has been great.
And in case you missed our first episode, if you still don't know where to look, we will be, well, at this point, we have released our Discord server. So we would love for you all to connect with us there, join us, maybe find some like-minded people as well. And let's build the community together, right? Let's build a community, a Godsib community where we all build each other up and build stronger bonds.
Come and gossip with us.
Yep.
From High Tea Mystique. Thank you again for listening. Bye.
Bye.